How's it going, Xesht? So I finally have the final version of my full mana Stormweaver Spark Guide online, and this build is clearly an all-round build. So we're not using cast on shock or any other temporalis, auto bomber or whatever stuff. This is a pretty clean build which is focusing on raw spark damage, and you can pretty much do all content with this. You can do boss fights, as you can see right now. We are doing map bosses in seconds. We can do the Citadel bosses. We can absolutely do tier 4 Simulacrum. It's absolutely no problem with this build. And I have to be honest, with Arbiter, I just don't have enough experience, I would assume. So I died to tier 4 Arbiter because I failed the mechanics. But I think if you know what you're doing, you can easily do tier 4 Arbiter with this as well. And obviously, you can do breaches and all the other stuff. So this is a pretty detailed guide, so make sure to check the description down below for the sections you're interested in. We have skill tree, we have passive tree, we have skills, we have items, we have an extra section for every stat, like, you know, lightning penetration, magnitude of shock, all that stuff. And at the end we also have like video from the last 3 wave of Simulacrum. We have breach boss, we have map bosses, we have Citadel bosses, and we also have my failed attempt of tier 4 Arbiter. I just end up not having enough divine orbs left to do that boss, but you know, probably I just need some training and then that boss should also be no issue. That being said, make sure to check the description down below. As always, I also have all trade links for all the gear you need for this build in there, and also check the Mobalytics planner. If you're looking for the path of building, that's going to be in the Mobalytics planner at the top right. You can see it on your screen right now, so just copy the path of building code there. I have the entire build in path of building. So now, without further ado, let's get going with the guide, and we're going to start with the items. Let's go through the gear. So this gear I'm running right now is not cheap at all, but it's also not very expensive. So I would assume, depending on the rolls you have on gear, I'm right now in the range somewhere between 150 and 250 divines. You can definitely get a similar gear set, maybe with like, you know, 5 to 10% less stats for, I would say, roughly 100 to 150 divines. I think if you have much less, you're not going to be very successful. But let's start with the gear. So first of all, we want to have a wand. We want to have a maximum mana. We want to have intelligence on every single gear piece. Intelligence is very important because we do intelligence stacking. So this is the most important stat. Mana regeneration is nice, cast speed is also nice, obviously, but don't sweat cast speed too much. It makes the items very, very expensive, and in general, I would say you don't need more than 0.25 attacks per second to play comfy. So, again, increased spell damage is nice, maximum mana is nice, 5 to all lightning spells, then intelligence and mana regeneration or cast speed. The first stat gain, the conversion into fire damage doesn't really do all that much. So this is a pretty decent one. This is in the range of, I would say, like 30 to 40 divines, which I bought it for. Then let's go for the armor pieces. So for helmets, gloves, and boots, I basically tend to buy relatively cheap items and corrupt them for the double sockets. Because getting the very expensive ones with one socket, they most of the time just end up being a little bit better, but they cost like 10 to 15 times as much. So for the helmet, you want to have double resistance, intelligence, maximum mana, and a good amount of energy shield. So this helmet was like 4 divines and then it got corrupted. For gloves, same story. You really just want to have mana and rarity, and you want to have intelligence and 1 resistance on gloves. You can get 2 resistances without the rarity if you want, but I feel like this one is pretty good. This is also like roughly 3 to 4 divines. Maybe they're a little bit more expensive right now. So really highly recommend buying these and corrupting them for 2 sockets. I wouldn't buy like max stat gloves for like, you know, 20 to 30 divines. And for boots, you want to have 30%, 35% movement speed, honestly, is luxury. 30% is just fine. You want to have mana, intelligence, and 2 resistances. So these were, I got these for relatively cheap, but if you go down to like 30% movement speed, these are absolutely affordable. And obviously, we also have the trade links in the description down below. Then for focus, here you want to go a decent amount of energy shield. I recommend getting like 250 plus. Then you want to have a level of all spell gems, and I choose cast speed here on my focus. You don't have to do this, but I like cast speed on the focus because on the focus is relatively cheap to pick up. And then we go for intelligence and double socket again. So you can get like these focuses with like 450 plus energy shield and good stats, but they're gonna have just one socket. And again, they're not gonna be so much better in the end than these kind of focuses. And this one here is also fairly cheap to get. Then we go for the rings. So I use one ring with Corruption of Strength to wear my Moria Invictus. So these are a little bit rough to get, but you know, you can search for them. But if you don't have one of these, you can fix your strengths in other ways. But this one I basically just use to fix my resistances, and it has a good amount of mana and it has rarity. So you definitely want to have rarity on all your rings because it's a very important stat. But here, again, lots of auras on one ring and intelligence, mana, rarity. The other ring is pretty much just a stat stick for mana. You're gonna have mana, rarity, intelligence, and mana regeneration on this, and auras. So I could get a better one than this one here, but you know, I think this one is good enough for me. Then for the amulet, you want to have maximum mana, percent increased maximum mana as high as possible, +3 projectile skills. You can try to get +3 spell skills, but it's extremely expensive. Then, you know, perfect would be all attributes, obviously, here, but I have intelligence and dexterity. It helps me wearing my Moria Invictus. Then you want to have ingenuity with like 70% plus. You know, don't go for the very low ones unless you're really broke, but 70% plus are not so expensive at this point. And then for the Moria Invictus, you want to have a 5-socket with attributes and mana, and you want to obviously put mana soul cores into everything. And then on the weapon slot, last but not least, we just want to have chiming stuff with plus all spell skills, so you can get the sigil up. Plus all spell skills is not a requirement at all. It's nice to have cast speed on here as well, but also not a requirement. Basically, any chiming stuff will do. And last but not least, as for the charm here, I use freezing charm. I know a lot of people are saying get stun threshold. I get stunned all the time. I die. I don't really understand what's going on with these guys, but I really never get stunned. Like I don't even wear a stun charm, so I'm not sure what's all the story with the stun threshold. I feel like I don't need it. I get, you know, mini stun like a very, very little on maps, but you know, stuff is gonna die to sparks anyway. And then last but not least, second time we have Melting Maelstrom. So this really helps just for boss fights mainly. On the map, you don't really need it at all because on a map, you're just gonna run around and, you know, I just cast like, you know, twice a second or something like that on a map. So I'm not gonna have any mana issues. So we use the Melting Maelstrom really just for bosses to get our mana back while we are like spamming our sparks. So for the skill tree, I will divide this into a skill tree and jewel section. So this is for a level 96 right now. So I'm getting the Scouring Winds here for additional exposure. If I choose to do boss fights, we go for double shock and we go into Force of Will, obviously. If you struggle with resistance, don't sweat Scouring Winds. You can definitely go for elemental resistances here. It's absolutely no drama getting this. So we changed the starting a little bit. So here's one thing. If you are level 96, you go this route, right? If you're level 95, you go this route and pick pure energy instead of raw power. This just gives you like a little bit more DPS. But if you are just short of one skill point, just go this route here and pick pure energy. Then we go to the top here, and now we have like a bunch of complicated jewels here. So first of all, you want to have the controlled metamorphosis here, and I use this to fix one resistance mainly. It's relatively easy to fix resistances with these. These are not very expensive. I mean, this was, I think, like roughly like 15 to 20 divines. I don't remember exactly. I have it like a long time ago. But you want to go for like, you know, as slow as possible to minus all elemental resistance. Chaos doesn't matter. And again, it's nice to have like a corrupted implicit to fix one resistances. And you want to have the massive ring here. So then we can get the pure power, we can get the lightning quick, we can get the drenched, and we can get the eldritch will from it. So next jewel then is going to be our Against the Darkness. Again, I also use this with a corrupted implicit to fix one resistance. The small passives does not matter at all. So you just want to have the 4% intelligence. These should not be very expensive. right now. I don't know the exact price, but you have the trade links all in the description down below. And this one basically just gives us 12% mana, so pretty much straightforward. We just want to have a 12% increased int because this is an int stacking build. Remember, we got more than 1200 int in this build. So then next thing we use is our From Nothing with Eldritch Battery. I think this was also roughly 20 to 30 divines. I don't exactly remember. Again, check the trade links in the description down below. So what this does is it allows you to pick everything within the small radius of Eldritch Battery. So this is basically our Etherflow, our Arcane Intensity, and our raw mana. So what we end up doing by this, we saved this 1, 2, 3 nodes, basically 4 nodes actually. And 4 nodes is definitely worth a jewel slot because we can pick up more int by saving these little mana regeneration nodes here. This is not a requirement. If you don't have this, you can just pick these 4 nodes here, and you know you're gonna just you know have 1 jewel slot left then. So you get the jewel, a different one, right? But you would, for example, have to remove this jewel then instead of it. So you would basically just lose like these 20 int from the passing nodes here. So then we have some nodes. So mainly we really only go for jewel slots, but some important nodes. Obviously we need Eldritch Battery, and obviously we need Mind Over Matter. And then we need CI here, so we are immune to chaos damage. And that's pretty much all the nodes we pick here. Yeah, we pick the intelligence, and that is it. We don't pick any other nodes other than really value nodes. So mental alacrity is a value node. Why is it a value node? Because it gives 10 intelligence. So remember, we are doing intelligence stacking here. Intelligence most important. So what does this node do? Actually, it gives us 10 intelligence, so that's, you know, 2 passing nodes give 10, right? And we get a bunch of cast speed, actually 11% cast speed, and 15% mana regeneration on top of it. So this makes it a good value node. If this wouldn't have 10 intelligence, we wouldn't choose this node. And then, you know, we just do a bunch of passing here to get all the jewel slots. We're going to talk about the jewels right after this. Then we go for Wild Storm here, because this gives us 15% more maximum damage, which is very important. And then we go down here all the way, and then we're going to pick up another value node here. So acceleration is a value node. Why is it a value node? Well, actually it gives skill speed. So skill speed is basically cast speed and attack speed. So we get 16% of this for 3 nodes, and we get 3% increased movement speed. And movement speed is very, very hard to get, so I consider this a value node. And then we get here Magnitude of Shock. So Magnitude of Shock is a very, very strong multiplier since we get double shock. You don't have to technically do this, but this is a complete hybrid build for bossing and mapping, so you want to have your shock magnitude. So, and then we go down here to the very bottom, and we go for Lightning Rod. So Lightning Rod makes non-critical hit lucky. So our Spark cannot critical hit because, as you notice, we have the controlled destruction. So controlled destruction makes that it can't crit. Because it can't crit, it's lucky. And what does lucky mean? It actually rolls twice. So since lightning usually does like 1 to 100 damage, right? And if you roll it twice, it ends up being a 33% damage increase, which also synergizes very nice with the Wild Storm, which just increases the maximum lightning damage here. So, and then we take these 2 value nodes here for lightning penetration. So this is 21% lightning penetration and chance to shock. So this is pretty nice. We're going to talk about lightning penetration at the jewel section. And then last but not least, we just choose the 10% increased attributes here because again, we have our in-stacking build here. So with this 10% increased attributes and 1 dexterity node, we basically have 55 and 64. So that ends up being just enough to wear our Moria Invictus. So we have the 15 strengths here, right? And we have the 15 dexterity on our amulet. So that way we can basically wear all our gear. So the 15 strengths gets increased by ingenuity. So if you would just have 10, I think even 9 would be enough for us to carry the armor here. So let's quickly talk about the weapon sets here, because I didn't really mention it. So for the weapon set 2 here, which is going to be our curse weapon set, we basically choose all these curse nodes here. And then we have all these curse nodes here. We have these curse nodes here. And we just have this one little area of effect node here. For our weapon set 1, this is basically these 4 nodes here is weapon set 1, and this one here is also weapon set 1. And then we just choose some attack related nodes, right? So these are just damage nodes. These are weapon set 1. These magnitude of shock here are weapon set 1. These movement and cast speed are weapon speed set 1. And these Wildstorm, like this cluster here, which also ends up doing damage, is weapon set 1. So we have a good distinction of weapon set 1 being pure damage, and weapon set 2 is basically being a pure buff to curses. So let's talk about the jewels. So I pulled out the jewels from the skill tree so it's a little bit easier to understand. So all our jewels are magic corrupted with a corruption of at least 8, better 9 or 10 intelligence, as you can see. And then we use the Adorned here. I have a 64% Adorned. Adorns are very expensive. I don't really remember what I end up paying for this. This was, I think, like 60 divines when I bought it. So this is definitely the most expensive part of the gear. You can get a lower one for cheap, but this is definitely, I would try to get like something roughly 60%. Getting a one which goes close to 100% is extremely expensive, but you know, the Adorned is very important. And then outside of the Adorned, we play these corrupted magic jewels here. So which ones do we want to do? So we want to use Magnitude of Shock. So these are Magnitude of Shock and Magnitude of Ailments. Right, these don't have any secondaries. I don't have good ones. As you see, I have 14, 15%. I have 118, 116%. But basically, these are nice jewels to run. So then next thing I want to run is some projectile duration with, you can get them with skill damage, spell damage, relatively cheap, but you can also get like max increased skill effect duration ones. I like to run 2 of these. You don't have to do this, but I like my spark to last roughly 4 seconds. Then you want to run 1 jewel with 9 to 10% lightning penetration and 1 jewel with 2% mana on kill. This one, I was very lucky to get this for like 5 divines, but you don't need the double stat, right? Just get one with just 2% mana on kill. All these jewels are in the range of like 1 to 3 divines each, so definitely nothing very expensive here. So if you're bossing, these 2 ones here are useless. Lightning penetration does nothing against bosses, and recover mana on kill does nothing against bosses. So these 2, you're just gonna switch to Magnitude of Shock or Magnitude of Ailments. So then quickly on the unique jewels, we also already talked about the Adorned here. Then I have Prism of Belief with +1 spark. These are relatively affordable. I think they were like 30 divines when I bought this. It's probably going to be expensive, more expensive right now. Again, check the trade links in the description down below. But this gives a decent amount of extra DPS for the cost of 1 jewel slot. Then, you know, we already talked about these 3 jewels, and the other unique jewel here is really just the Adorned. For Spark, we're going to play Persistence. This doesn't give you paper DPS, but if your projectiles last longer, it definitely works on bosses, for example, because, you know, the projectiles which you launch when the boss is not active yet will hit the boss, so it's going to give you significantly more DPS. Also on maps, it's very nice to just have your projectiles travel a bit longer, and I would definitely recommend having this stat. Then we run Considered Casting for 40% more damage. We run Arcane Tempo for 25% more cast speed. We run Controlled Destruction for another 30% more damage, and we use Acceleration to have more projectile speed, so our projectiles reach stuff faster and kill stuff faster. Again, this is also not a paper DPS increase. So you want to have a level 21 spark. 21 sparks are like 10 divines right now. So 20% quality and level 21 is definitely something you want to get. If you're still at a 20 spark, you know, and you don't have the cash, don't sweat it. But I highly recommend getting this upgrade at first, because this is pretty much 10% more raw damage, 10 to 15% more raw damage for just getting the level 21 spark, which costs roughly 10 divines. So we are sitting at 365k DPS. That's not very high, if you might think, but you know, we are doing this with a cast time of 0.25 seconds. You will see a lot of builds using cast times of 0.1 seconds, which is going to be extremely expensive. But what I tend to focus on is to have like a very high hit damage. So we are close to, 100k hit damage per spark. So you can increase this number by doing a couple of tweaks, but I don't recommend it. So I'm playing the spark without inspiration. So this is definitely not for everyone, and this is more like a high-end solution. As you can see, my spark costs 1000 mana, so if I spam some sparks here, you can see I get out of mana pretty quickly. And since mana is our hit pool, you don't want to sit around at 50% mana like at any point of time. So you want to be at 100% mana all the time. So on a map, it doesn't really matter at all because you're going to get your mana returned by hitting mobs, by killing mobs with mana return on kill. But if you're on a boss and you do this, and now the boss hits you, you're dead. So if you're on a boss, you have to be comfy with playing this with this high cost. Because if you look at my mana rack, I have like, when I'm moving, I have 2k mana rack. And, still, it's not even going to be remotely enough to save you from going out of mana here. So what you can do is, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, you can remove Persistence Gem and put Inspiration Gem. So this reduces your mana cost to like 500, and now you can spam all day long. Right, so this is definitely something you can do. It's going to reduce your DPS by a little bit. It's not the written DPS, but your real DPS is going to suffer a little bit, especially when you're doing boss fights, because projectile duration is a quite nice stat to have. But just keep in mind that you can do this. So if you don't want to run Inspiration into your bossing, you have to use your Melting Maelstrom Flask. There's no way around it, because otherwise you're not going to have enough damage. So what you're going to do is basically, every 70% or something like that, like this, you basically want to use your flask, get yourself up in mana, and if the boss is not going to be dead now, you have a problem. Because if the boss is not going to be dead until your charges are down, so what you're going to do now, you're going to do like 1 second cast, like 1 cast a second, and the boss is going to take forever. So if you do this, you have to do very high damage, and you have to be comfortable you can kill the boss within 7 flask charges with this, which is generally no problem at all. So next thing, we have connectivity. We really just use it in boss fights, and this is going to be on our weapon slot too. We're going to explain this a little bit later. So we use Hate and Curse for more effectiveness. We use Ritualistic Curse, so they have more area of effect. We use Curse Ground because I run bosses and I want to put it on the ground so the boss spawns and directly gets cursed. You don't have to use this, but since I barely use this on a map or anywhere at all, and I really just use this on bosses, as soon as the bosses spawn, they get cursed, and I don't need to switch my weapon while I'm already like pumping out sparks to do my DPS. So highly recommend doing this. And then we have Focus Curse for a reduced delay, so the curse actually gets on the mob. So next thing is going to be Orb of Storms. I don't really use it on maps at all. The damage of it doesn't really matter so much. So we use it with lightning exposure, so it applies lightning exposure, so we can do more damage on bosses. Then we use Strip Away to get more exposure effect. We use Overabundance, so we can put 2 orbs, so they apply exposure faster. Then we have Font of Mana, so we just get a little bit more mana regeneration while they're active. And last but not least, I use Overpower for more stun. So stun actually works quite well in this build. Most bosses, especially map bosses, get stunned very, very fast, and this just increases the effect a little bit. You can use any other gem here, but I really don't find anything else useful for this skill. So next thing is obviously Archmage, and you want to have a level 21 Archmage, because Archmage has a breakpoint at level 21 where it jumps from 8% more damage to 9% damage. So that's actually a huge damage increase of more than like 15% or whatever. So you want to have a level 21 Archmage. You can either just get a level 19 Corrupted, which is basically free, or you want to get a level 20, which is, it costs roughly like 6 or 7 divines right now. So also it's not a huge deal, but you only need the level 21 Spark Gem if you want to run Lightning Mastery on Spark. So a lot of people like paper DPS, so just removing this persistence here and getting you the Lightning Mastery just increases your paper DPS by, roughly 10 to 15%, and you also might get an additional projectile. See, now it's 24 and now it's 23, right? So this is like another 2% increase or something like that. So this is not too bad at all. And you can run this if you have a level 21 Archmage. If you don't have a level 21 Archmage, you definitely have to use Lightning Mastery on your Archmage. So then we still have Mana Tempest here. I'm not using this if you use the full mana version of this build, you don't want to use Mana Tempest, because if you throw down Mana Tempest and then you burn your mana, you're basically instantly dead. So Mana Tempest you really only play if you play Energy Shield based builds, then you can definitely play it. And you play Mana Tempest with Predetermination for more damage, and you can get the hits Culling Strike, which is pretty nice. So if you want to play Mana Tempest, really don't do this if you're running without Energy Shield. Just like very, very important. Then Flame Wall. Flame Wall I also rarely use. I use it in Simulacrum and on boss fights because it adds a little bit of DPS. So you want to use it with Spell Cascade, Fortress, and Energy Barrier. I don't know if Energy Barrier does anything, but people keep telling me I should put it on there. I have no idea. I think it does nothing, basically. But yeah, so Flame Wall, basically the idea is you put Flame Wall and then it just puts your sparks on fire. It just gives you a little bit more DPS in those boss fight scenarios. So what is up with these skeletal clerics? As soon as I do my weapon swap, basically I have a soul offering here with Dance Macabre and Ablation. These just give this offering a little bit more power. So if you do this soul offering, as I'm doing it right now, so it's not going to cast anything because it needs the skeletal clerics to be active. So we have 2 skeletal clerics here, and then we have soul offering. So as soon as the skeletal clerics are up, we can use our soul offering, and then we're gonna get a huge damage buff for, it's like 6 or 7 seconds. So you can definitely use it on bosses if you know the timing. I would not use this inside of a map, because if you look at this, how long it actually takes to do this swap. So let's go to Spark, and now I'm just gonna spam soul offering, and you're gonna see how long it takes, right? So as you can see, this is roughly 1.5 seconds until this becomes active. So this is definitely only something you want to do on bossing, because on a map you will be stuck with, your secondary weapon sets for way too long, and you don't want to do this. But if you're bossing, this really just gives you a nice extra burst of DPS, right? So as you do your Sigil of Power and your Soul Offering, and then you cast for a little bit. As you can see, my DPS already goes to the millions here. So highly recommend using this on boss fights because it's essentially free and it's on weapon swap. So let's talk a little bit about stats. Let's start with Lightning Penetration. So if you're on a map, you are not going to curse your mobs and you're not going to put exposure on your mobs. So Lightning Penetration basically helps dealing, this is 35, so this is roughly 35% more damage you can make it. So you should get 40 to maximum 50% Lightning Penetration. Again, I only have 35, that is way more than enough for me. If you're just bossing, Lightning Penetration literally does nothing. But since this is an all-round build, I want to run a good amount of Lightning Penetration for as cheap as possible. So our investment is really just 1 Lightning Penetration jewel and these 2 nodes. This is all investment we have into Lightning Penetration. And it just gives you a bunch of extra damage on bosses, or for example in Simulacrum, because it's going to reduce the base resistances of monsters which are not cursed or having exposure. If you put Conductivity at 70% minus res on enemies, the penetration does nothing, because this goes first and then comes penetration, and penetration doesn't go after 0. Same goes if you have exposure from Orb of Storms, which gives, another 50% minus res or something like that. That completely disables lightning penetration, basically. So let's go for Magnitude of Shock. So Magnitude of Shock, we use these Frazzled nodes, which are very, very strong, right? This gives a lot of Magnitude of Shock. And then we try to get Magnitude of Shock of most of our jewels. Why is that? Well, basically we do 2 shocks, and shocks just give the enemy more damage, right? So in this build, in the all-round version, you have roughly 60 to 65% magnitude of shock on a single shock. If you do bossing, you have roughly 70 to 75%, and that times 2. So you have 150% more shock, because you have strike twice, so you get 2 shocks. So if you have 75% magnitude of shock, with this makes 150% more damage. This is absolutely strongest multiplier you can get magnitude of shock on all of your jewels. It's not going to do anything against white mobs and blue mobs because these usually die before they even get shocked. But, you know, for any kind of elite mobs and bosses, they get shocked, and this is really a huge multiplier. So let's talk about intelligence. So I have an intelligence stacking build. So people ask me, how do you get so much intelligence? How do you get so much mana? How do you get so much damage? So this build is intelligence stacking. So as you can see, we have 1200 intelligence. We only get this by focusing on certain stats. So we want to have as much intelligence as possible. That's why we basically choose so little points on the skill tree, and we choose so many passing nodes of intelligence, and we have all our jewels, well, all which can have a corrupt of intelligence with a corrupt of intelligence, right? So all these are going to have a corrupted intelligence, and these are going to be multiplied with the adorned to give us a lot of intelligence. Then on top of it, we have attribute percentage. So we choose this one here for 10% increased attributes. These are also like basically intelligence nodes, right? They just give +3. And then we have the spaghettification anoint here, which gives another 7%, so that's 17. And then we have the adorned here, which gives us another 12. So this is 29% increased intelligence from our skill tree. And then on our gear, we have another 25% from our Moria Invictus. So we got more than 50% increased intelligence. So if you commit into like attributes like that, you have to commit with your gear. So every piece of your gear should have the highest possible intelligence. So see, my hammer has 31, my wand has 30, my focus has 31, my boots have 32, my gloves have 32, my rings have 33 and 31, and my amulet has another 28. So these are by far not perfect. I could get a little more, but as you can see, I have a lot of intelligence on my gear in my passive tree, and then I do the percent attributes, and that way I reach 1200 intelligence. So this gives us a lot of mana, which is obviously great for Spark Stormweaver, but we also have like this pure power node. So since we have 1200 intelligence, this actually is another 240% additive damage. And then obviously intelligence gives mana, which then, you know, works with like the Arcane intensity. And, you know, obviously we get attack speed and all that stuff from our Force of Will. So this is why we focus so heavily on intelligence here. So let's talk about mana regeneration. So first of all, if you run Inspiration, mana regeneration doesn't matter all that much, right? But if you don't run Inspiration, it actually matters. So I have 1000 mana cost on my Spark, and I burn down like very, very fast, even though I have 2k mana regeneration. So I have a lot of people telling me, you don't need any mana regeneration, just put cast speed on all your rings, put, you know, cast speed on your wand, and then just use the Melting Maelstrom. I don't know, but I don't think that's working. I mean, you're gonna be out of mana within like 1 or 2 seconds. If you cannot kill a boss within 6 charges with that ridiculous setups without mana regeneration, I think that's just some people like talking bullshit. So I highly recommend getting some mana regeneration. So I recommend get 1 ring with high mana regeneration and get it on your wand. On your wand and on your ring, they're gonna be very cheap to get. On the other ring, you know, I rather use to like fix rarity, intelligence, whatever. But you know, this is kind of the spot I am. I don't pick any mana regeneration from the passive tree other than the Etherflow here, and you know, some which ends up being on value nodes, like this one has 15% and the Frazzled has another 15%. But that's pretty much all mana regeneration I choose on tree. I don't choose anything else because I don't want to waste my points into that stat. And you know, I end up having 2k mana regeneration, which is completely comfortable for me. Just with the stuff I have, with the 90% on my one ring and the 60% on my wand. Cast speed. So cast speed makes your gameplay more fluent. So as you walk and then you cast, as you can see, whenever I cast, I stop for like a tiny fraction of a second, and then I move on. Well, I'm not stalking, but I'm slowing down. So the more cast speed you have, the faster you can run while casting. And obviously, if you're bossing, the more cast speed you have, the more damage you can do in a certain amount of time. On the flip side, the more cast speed you have, the faster you're going to burn your mana down to 0. So I found for me that the sweet spot I feel like is roughly around 0.25 seconds cast time. You can get lower. I have seen people as low as 0.1, but you know, this is kind of the sweet spot I like. If I'm moving on a map, I'm basically just casting like once or twice a second anyway, so I usually do like this. I'm not even casting more because these sparks will just kill anything anyway. And on a boss, if I burn myself down too quickly, I have to use my Melting Meltstorm. And I only have 7 charges. And I'm not so experienced in bossing, so if you know all the timings perfectly, you can probably spam yourself down to like almost 0 and then just drink, and spam yourself down to almost 0 and then just drink again. But I'm just not experienced enough in boss fights to do this. But so that's why I'm not focusing heavily on cast speed. I would recommend picking up cast speed on your focus. I felt like focus was the most cost efficient to pick it up. On a wand, it's going to be ridiculously expensive, and on rings, you're going to skip either on magic find or, you know, all resistances, or on intelligence. So on rings, you have to give up something for the cast speed. On a wand, it's very expensive, and you also have to give up mana regeneration for it. And on a focus, you basically don't have to give up anything for it, because the focus, well, yes, it can have mana regeneration too, but just from my purchasing experience, cast speed is the cheapest to get on your focus. And then furthermore, we have some cast speed in the tree, right? We have the mental alacrity. We talked about it. It's a value node. And all the other cast speed we have here in acceleration. And I don't have any more cast speed on the tree. All the other cast speed here comes from our Arcane Search, which ends up being quite nice. So my recommendation, 0.25 seconds cast speed, seems to be the sweet spot for me. And I forgot one. We also have Lightning Quick here, which is another value node, which we just pay 1 point, and it's another 8% cast speed. So last stat I want to talk about is spell damage. So this would be increased spell damage or increased lightning damage. It is a quite valuable stat, but it's also difficult to get. So on your rings, you can get like these for like 30%. Don't sweat getting these on your rings. Your rings are going to be ridiculously expensive just if they're having like 30% lightning damage in a prefix. So screw your rings, don't get it on the rings. I would get it on a wand. It's fairly cheap. You can get more than 100%. You can get much better wands than this with a lot of spell damage. And I would get it on the wand. It's the best value to get. You can get it on a focus, but the rolls will be low, and you want to have your prefixes on the focus rather for mana and energy shield. You can get it on your amulet, like mine is pretty lucky that I have a 30%, but this is also going to make your amulet ridiculously more expensive. So really, I would not focus getting these stats anywhere other than your wand, and maybe on some jewels. Because what is the story with the spell damage, right? It sounds very good, 70% more spell damage, but if you calculate what you already have, so you have pure power, and I have 1200 intelligence, right? So my pure power already gives me 240%. Then we have the Arcane intensity, which gives me 3% per 100 mana, so I have 10,000 mana. So this is another 300%, right? So we are at over 500% already with these two stats. And these stats are basically given to us. They are for free. That means we start with 500% increased spell damage. So then if you think about, we already having 500%, and we have some more, obviously, right? Here's, this is another 50% lightning damage. So we had 550. This is another 40. So let's say we're at 600% lightning damage from these stats here. And well, that's actually everything I have. So we are at a base of 600%. So what does it mean for this 71% wand? Well, this 71% doesn't give you 70% spell damage. It basically gets added to the 600. So you go from 600 to 600 70, which ends up being 12% more damage, which is nice for the 71%, right? You get 12% more damage, but just imagine having, for example, this 30% on the amulet makes it like double the expensive, but 30% out of your 600% you already have is not even going to be 5% damage boost. Same goes for your jewels, so you can get ridiculously expensive jewels which have a spell damage prefix on this. I have, for example, this one here, has a 7% increased spell damage, which is pretty nice because, you know, this ends up being 30%, so this gives me like 2 or 3% extra damage. But what I want to say with this is, don't sweat spell damage. We have a base spell damage modifier of more than 600% for free from our skill tree, so it's far less expensive, it's far less effective if you are running a non-Archmage build. If you're running a build without Archmage, spell damage will be so much more effective. If you're running a build without, pure power or without Arcane intensity, spell damage is going to be much more effective. But in this build, spell damage is not super effective. It's a nice stat. It does end up doing quite a bit, but I wouldn't make this a very, very high focus other than the wand. Alright, next stat we're gonna focus on is recover percent mana on kill. So we have this recover 2% mana on kill jewel. We have a 64% adorn, so this is basically recover 3% mana on kill. This is absolutely enough. You don't need any more. So this on a map gives you a ridiculous amount of survivability and mana return. You can really just, spam your spark, and as soon as mobs die, you're just gonna get your mana back, and that's it. So I highly recommend get one of these jewels. Don't get more than one. One is totally fine. Don't skip this stat. You're going to have a hard time mapping without this stat because you cannot really spam spark consistently. So highly recommend getting 1-2% mana on kill jewel here. So one thing I want to talk really quickly is Pierce and chain. So we have branching bolts here in this setup, and we just have like a 60% chain, and it's totally enough for mapping. You don't even need branching bolt for mapping. It works just fine without. Branching bolts does literally nothing against bosses, but on a map, the 60% chain is really nice. You can have Pierce. Pierce is also nice against bosses because your projectiles can hit them multiple times, but I don't really have any how to pick up Pierce in this build. There's no node which I can use, and since I get branching bolt basically for free, the 60% chain is really nice. You can definitely get these two other 20%, but I found out, you know what, the 60% is totally enough. Don't waste your points in these two nodes because these can also be like 10 int, which is way more important. So just for completion, I want to show my Atlas tree. I don't know what the Atlas tree has anything to do with the build, but it doesn't really matter. So most people play these two quantity nodes instead of these two tablet nodes. So since I'm doing like quite a bit of mapping and I do quite a bit of juicing with towers, I think these are more effective than these. But besides this is a pretty standard Atlas tree. You can just check it in the planner in the description. You know, this is a standard breach tree. This is here my boss tree. This is my Arbiter tree. I don't even run these. This is my Delirium tree. I really do this. I have never run this one here. And I have never run Expedition, so this is something I want to try still. But, you know, this is my tree. It's heavily focusing on juicing maps here and not focusing so much on like, strange stats here nobody really does.
A rare treasure. Darukan favors me.
Believe me, you will exile. Keep your precious sanity, my agent of chaos. You shall serve me whether you like it or not. I'm not going anywhere.
Victory is mine.
Burns for you. Fields of ash and chasms of flame shall restore her memory.